The Harley's engine spoke before the sun did. At 6:15 in the morning, the Arizona highway was empty in both directions. Nothing but asphalt stretching into the dark, bordered by saguaro silhouettes, standing like sentinels against a sky that hadn't yet decided what color it wanted to be. The desert smelled of creosote and cooling stone, and the kind of silence that only existed before the world remembered. It had obligations. Rex Malone rode through all of it the way a man rode when he'd done this 10,000 times. Easy on the pegs, hands loose on the grips of the 1998 Harley Fat Boy that had carried him across more miles than he could count and through more trouble than he cared to remember. The engine's rhythm was as familiar to him as his own heartbeat, low and steady, and completely without apology. He was 63 years old. His hair had gone silver somewhere in his mid-50s, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly when, the way you couldn't pinpoint the exact moment winter became spring. It was pulled back from a face that the desert had worked on for decades, carving lines around his eyes and mouth that told the story of a man who had laughed hard, fought hard, and survived things that should have killed him. 220 pounds of muscle gone softer at the edges, but still solid where it counted, the shoulders, the jaw. The hands that rested on the fat boy's grips with the ease of a man who had made peace with his own strength. His boots were scarred leather, steel-toed, older than some marriages. His jacket was plain canvas, faded brown, no patches. The jacket was important. The absence of patches was important. It had taken 16 years to earn the right to wear a jacket with nothing on the back, and Rex Malone understood that some achievements look like subtraction. Dusty Creek was 12 miles ahead. Population 25,000, give or take, whoever had moved in or out since the last census. One main street, two traffic lights. The kind of town where the hardware store owner knew your truck by sound, and the woman at the post office had been sorting your mail since before you were born. Rex had hated places like this when he was young. Too small, too close, too much like being watched. Now at 63, he understood that being known was not the same as being trapped. Sometimes it was the only thing that kept a man tethered to who he was trying to be. The sun began its work on the horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and old rust. Beautiful if you were the kind of man who noticed such things. Rex noticed. He'd had 16 years of quiet mornings to learn how. 16 years since he'd walked away from the Hells Angels. 16 years since he'd handed over his patch and his president's rocker to the man who would take his seat at the table. 16 years of keeping his garage running. His head down, his hands busy with engines, instead of the kind of work his hands had known before. 16 years of being just Rex Malone, mechanic, early riser, regular customer, at a corner diner that had been standing since before the highway was paved. The exit for Dusty Creek appeared on his right. He took it. Main Street was still mostly dark at this hour, the shop windows reflecting the early gray light. The sidewalks empty except for a few old-timers who'd given up on sleep the way old-timers did not. Because they couldn't get it, but because they decided the morning was worth more than the extra hour in bed. Rex understood that calculation completely. He'd started making it himself somewhere around 60. He passed the hardware store, the barber shop, the diner supply place that had changed owners twice in the last decade, but somehow kept the same handwritten hours sign in the window. He passed the small park where the old men played chess on Saturday mornings and argued about things that hadn't mattered since 1987. And there at the corner of Main and Sycamore lights, burning warm and gold in the pre-dawn darkness, Ruth's Diner. 40 years on that corner. 40 years of the same hours, the same coffee, the same handwritten specials on the chalkboard above the counter. Ruth Malone had bought the building in 1984, with money she'd saved working double shifts for 11 years, waitress by day, cleaning offices by night. Raising a son alone in a two-bedroom house that should have fallen apart but somehow never did. She'd painted the outside herself white with red trim and put a simple sign above the door that said what it needed to say and nothing more. Her name, her place, her life's work. Rex felt something ease in his chest the way it did every morning when he saw those lights. The same feeling 16 years running. The feeling of something that had stayed constant while everything else changed. His mother, awake before the world doing what she'd done since the year he was born, making the kind of comfort that arrived on a plate with 2 eggs, hash browns, and toast that had real butter on it because Ruth Malone had opinions about margarine and wasn't shy about sharing them. He pulled the fat boy into the spot he'd been parking in for 16 years, right out front, visible from the kitchen window, so she could see it, so she'd know he was there. He killed the engine. The silence came in like a tide. Rex sat with his hands still on the grips and didn't move. Something was wrong. Not wrong in any way he could point to, not a sound out of place or a shadow in the wrong position. Just wrong in the way that came from 30 years of moving through dangerous situations and surviving them. That frequency of stillness that wasn't peaceful, but was instead the quiet that preceded something. The instinct of a man who had learned the hard way that the moments before trouble arrived looked exactly like ordinary moments. He studied the diner through narrowed eyes. Lights on. Open sign glowing red in the window. Through the glass, the familiar interior, red vinyl booths worn soft at the edges from 40 years of use, white formica counter that Ruth kept clean enough to perform surgery on the checkerboard floor in black and white that had been outdated when she'd put it in and had somehow become a landmark. Everything in its place. Everything exactly as it should be. Except the parking lot was empty. At 6:30 on a Thursday morning, there should have been at least 2 trucks out here. Old Stu Hemming from the hardware store, who'd been getting coffee at Ruth's since the Carter administration. Maybe one of the Prescott Ranch hands, who came in early before a long day. The lot was empty and the absence sat wrong in Rex's chest like a stone dropped in still water. He swung his leg over the bike. His left knee protested the movement, that old familiar complaint. The one that showed up every morning to remind him that 63 years of living came with a ledger and the bill arrived daily. He walked to the door. The handle was unlocked. He pushed inside. The bell above the door chimed the same bell that had been there since 1984, bright and cheerful, and completely at odds with what was sitting in Rex's gut. The coffee was brewing. He could smell it, that rich darkness of the blend his mother had been ordering from the same supplier for 30 years. The grill surface was clean and ready. The prep area organized the way Ruth organized everything, which was to say that it looked effortless and was in fact the result of a discipline so deep it had become invisible. "Morning, Ma," Rex called out. His voice came out rougher than he intended. No answer. He moved deeper into the diner. Past the first booth, the second. Around the counter, through the narrow opening that led to the kitchen side where his mother usually stood in the early morning with her spatula in one hand and a coffee pot in the other, ready to tell you that you looked tired and should sit down, ready to fill your cup before you'd even asked. She was there, standing with her back to him, shoulders curved inward in a way that made her look smaller than she was. And Ruth Malone was not a small woman, not in any way that mattered. 85 years old, and she still stood straight. Still moved with the purpose that came from decades of knowing exactly what needed to be done and doing it. She was 5'4" and had made men twice Rex's size feel like they needed to apologize for taking up space. She was not standing straight now. "Ma." She turned, and Rex Malone's world went sideways. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut. The skin around it had gone that deep, ugly purple-black. That meant the impact had been significant and recent hours, not days. Her left cheekbone bore the distinct outline of a knuckle ridge, the kind of mark that only came from a deliberate blow delivered by a large hand. Her lower lip was split, a dark line of dried blood running to her chin. Her right hand was pressed against her ribs, holding the dish towel against her side with an awkwardness that meant she was protecting something underneath. For 10 full seconds, Rex didn't breathe. He didn't think. He didn't speak. Not the manageable fear of something that could be handled. The deep kind. The fear of someone who had seen something they didn't know how to put back. His mother, who had looked directly into the face of drunk men twice her size and told them to settle down or leave, and they had always settled down or left. His mother, who had run a diner in a rough-edged town for 40 years and never once backed away from a confrontation she believed was hers to handle. His mother, who had opened her door 16 years ago to a son covered in blood that wasn't his and hadn't flinched, had just held out a clean towel and asked if he needed stitches. She was afraid. Nobody. Her voice was thin in a way it had never been. I fell in the kitchen, caught the edge of the prep counter. It's nothing, Rex. Ma, I'm fine. She turned away from him, moving with that deliberate care that meant the ribs were worse than she was letting on. Sit down. I'll get your coffee. You want pancakes? I've got the batter ready. It won't take. Ma. He was across the kitchen in 2 steps, gentle. He'd learned gentle late in life, but he had learned it, and he took the coffee pot from her hands and set it down on the counter. Look at me. She wouldn't. Please. Slowly, as if the movement cost her something, she raised her eyes to his. And Rex saw the tears there held back by nothing but the sheer force of a will that had been holding things back for 85 years. Ruth Malone had cried twice in his memory. Once when his father's car ran off Route 9 in a rainstorm, and they got the call at 11 at night. Once when Rex had shown up at her door in the spring of 2008, 30 years of the life behind him, telling her he was done. She was not crying now, but the tears were there. Who hit you? Each word came out level and separate like stones laid down one at a time. Rex. Her voice broke slightly on his name just at the edges. Please don't ask me that. Ma? Please. And now her hand came up and caught his arm, and her grip was still strong. That was the thing about Ruth. The grip was always still strong. Don't ask me, because if I tell you, you'll do something. You'll go back to being that man. And I can't. She stopped, steadied. I can't watch you become him again. I can't lose what you've been for 16 years just because someone. She stopped again. Rex waited. The diner was very quiet around them. The coffee maker hissed softly. Somewhere out on Main Street, a truck passed. That man. He knew exactly which man she meant. The man he'd been before 16 years of quiet mornings and honest work, and the daily choice to be something different. The man who'd run the Tucson chapter of the Hells Angels for 11 years. The man whose name, Ian Malone, still made certain people in certain rooms lower their voices when it came up, even now, even after all this time. He had buried that man, or he had tried to. Some days the grave seemed deeper than others. Standing in his mother's kitchen, looking at her swollen eye, Rex felt something shift in his chest. Something old and dark that had been lying still for a long time. Not quite waking, but lifting its head. The bell above the front door chimed. Both of them turned. Beverly Oakes stood in the doorway. 50 years old, Beverly had been working at Ruth's Diner for 17 years. She was a solid woman, dependable in the way of people who showed up every day without being asked and remembered everything that mattered. Your usual order, your daughter's name, the fact that you liked your coffee with exactly 1 sugar and no one else's approximation of 1 sugar. She wore the same pale yellow uniform she'd worn for 17 years and carried herself with the dignity of a woman who knew her own worth and didn't require anyone else's confirmation of it. She took one look at Ruth's face and went the color of chalk. Oh, God. Her hand went to her mouth. Ruth. Oh, Ruth, I told you. I told you not to come in this morning. I said I could cover. I'm fine, Bev. Ruth's voice had gone flat and careful. I'm perfectly fine. You are not. Beverly. Rex's voice was quiet. The same tone he used with engines that were running wrong, not harsh, just precise. He hadn't moved from beside his mother. What happened here? Beverly's eyes cut to him, and in that look Rex saw everything he needed to know laid out plain. She knew. Not some of it, all of it. She had been carrying the weight of all of it, and the weight had been doing damage. She also knew who Rex was, not just Ruth's son. She'd worked here long enough to have heard things. I don't, I don't know what you... Beverly, still quiet. You've known me going on 17 years. Have I ever given you a reason to be scared of me? A long pause. No. Then tell me what happened. Beverly's hand went to her throat. Her eyes moved to Ruth, who said nothing, who stood with her good hand pressed flat against the counter, as if she needed the solidity of it to stay upright. I can't, Beverly whispered. Why? Because. She stopped, looked at the floor. When she looked up, her eyes were full. Because they said if anyone talked, they'd come back. And next time it wouldn't just be. Her hand went to her mouth again. She had said enough. She knew it, and Rex knew it. They'd come back, next time. Not random. Not some drunk wandering in off the highway looking for trouble and finding an old woman alone. This was deliberate, organized. Someone had walked into Ruth's diner, this corner, these 40 years, this woman, and done this on purpose. Rex felt his heart rate drop. Not from calm, from something older than calm. A physiological shift he recognized from 30 years of violent situations and had not felt in 16 years of peace. The shift that meant his body understood what was coming even before his mind had finished processing it. Beverly! His voice came out steady as a level line. Go home. Take the day off. I'll make sure Ruth covers your hours. Go home, lock your door, and don't open it for anyone you don't know personally. Can you do that? Beverly looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Ruth, and between the two women passed something that needed no translation. Then she nodded, once gathered her bag from behind the counter, and walked out without another word. The door chimed as it closed behind her. The diner was silent again. Rex pulled out the stool at the end of the counter and sat down facing his mother. He didn't loom over her, didn't stand with his arms crossed the way that closed people off. He sat because sitting said he was going to stay, and he was going to listen, and he wasn't going anywhere until she told him. Everything, he said, right now, from the beginning. Ruth looked at him for a long moment. Then her shoulders came down slightly, the way they did when someone stopped holding something up that had become too heavy to keep holding. She moved to the coffee maker, poured 2 cups, slid one across the counter to him. She kept both hands wrapped around hers. She looked down at the surface of the coffee, and she told him. 3 months ago, she said, a man in a suit had come in during the lunch rush, not a Dusty Creek suit, which was bolo tie and good jeans. A Phoenix suit, expensive fabric, a haircut that cost more than most people's car payments. He'd sat in the corner booth and eaten a very adequate plate of eggs and left a 20% tip, and on his way out he'd paused at the counter and introduced himself. He represented Irongate Capital, LLC, he said, a development firm based in Phoenix with significant interest in the Dusty Creek corridor. They had identified Ruth's property as a key acquisition for a major development project, and they wanted to make her an offer. $160,000. Ruth had looked at the man in the expensive suit and told him the diner wasn't for sale. He'd smiled, said he understood, said she should take her time, said these conversations often needed to settle before people could see clearly. He'd left a card on the counter. She'd put it in the drawer with the expired coupons and the spare batteries and the other things you weren't ready to throw away but had no real use for. 2 weeks later, he came back. Same suit, different tie, same smile, same offer. Ruth told him again, same answer. A week after that, she came in one morning to find the front window broken. A single brick on the floor among the glass, no note, no witnesses. She'd called Sheriff Yarborough. Clint had come by, looked at it, written something in his notebook, and told her it was probably kids. There'd been a rash of it lately, he said. He'd keep an eye out. Ruth had swept up the glass herself and called the glass company. 3 weeks after the window, she came out to the parking lot to find all 4 tires on her car slashed clean through. Again she called Yarborough. Again he came by, again the notebook, again the tired expression of a man whose attention was somewhere else. Kids, he said again. Maybe someone who'd had a bad experience at the diner. You know how people are. Ruth had called the tire place and walked to work for a week. She had not called Rex. She had not told Beverly the full story. She had not posted about it on the small-town Facebook group or mentioned it to her regulars over their morning coffee. Because Ruth Malone had lived 85 years by the principle that you handled your own affairs, and that asking for help before you'd exhausted your own resources was a form of giving up that she did not intend to do. Instead, she had started writing things down. Rex looked up at that. Ruth was already moving. She reached under the counter behind the row of coffee mugs and pulled out a notebook. Small spiral bound, the kind you bought in a pack of 3 at the drugstore for $1.99. She set it on the counter between them without explanation. Rex picked it up. It was dense with her handwriting, neat small print that she'd used his whole life. The handwriting of a woman who had always written as if paper were scarce and words had weight. Dates, times, descriptions. The suit's name from the business card. His company name. The license plates of the 2 cars he'd arrived in on his separate visits. A description of the brick that came through the window, including a note that the brick was the same reddish-gray as the quarry supply yard on the east edge of town. The tire incident. Another car that had idled across the street for 40 minutes one Tuesday afternoon. A dark blue sedan with a rental sticker on the rear bumper. A phone call she'd received at the diner at closing. No voice, just open air. And the sound of traffic that didn't match Dusty Creek. Rex turned the pages slowly. 3 months of his mother's careful, methodical, entirely self-contained investigation into the people who were trying to take her diner. She had not called him. She had handled her own affairs. And when handling her own affairs had gotten her a broken eye socket and cracked ribs, she had gotten up at 5 in the morning and opened the diner anyway. Last night, he said. Tell me about last night. Ruth's hands tightened around her coffee cup. She set it down because her hands had started to shake, and Ruth didn't like her hands to shake. She'd been counting the register at closing, 9:45. The last customer had left at 9:30. Beverly had gone home at 9, and Ruth was alone the way she'd been alone at closing for 40 years because she trusted no one with the register count and never had. She'd been finishing up when she heard the back door. She thought she'd locked it. She'd been wrong. He was large, much larger than the man in the suit, a different man entirely. 6'2", maybe 6'3", heavy through the shoulders, wearing a black jacket and no expression at all. He'd come through the kitchen without hurrying, without any drama, with the unhurried confidence of a man who had done things like this before and found them easy. He told her that Irongate Capital was prepared to be generous, that the offer of $160,000 still stood, that she had 24 hours to reconsider. She had told him no. She had told him this diner was hers, and she wasn't selling it to anybody. She had told him to get out, or she'd call the police. And then Ruth Malone, 85 years old, with 40 years of this diner in her bones, had looked at the man in the black jacket and told him that she had built this place herself. That she had mixed the concrete of the front step with her own hands back in 1986, when she had it repoured, that she had outlasted 4 recessions and 2 floods, and the year the highway got rerouted, and everyone said she'd be done within 6 months. She told him that whatever his employers thought they were going to do, they were wrong. She wasn't afraid of Irongate Capital. She wasn't afraid of men in suits or men in black jackets or people who thought money was a language that translated into everything. She was Ruth Malone. This was her diner, and she wasn't selling. He had hit her. Once open-handed with enough force to knock her against the prep counter and crack 2 ribs on the impact. Then he had grabbed her by the collar, brought his face close to hers and told her in a very calm voice that old women had accidents all the time. Falls, mostly. sometimes other things. Things that looked natural, things that didn't raise questions. He told her she had 24 hours. Then he'd walk back out through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the night. Ruth had locked the back door properly this time. She had gone to the bathroom and looked at her face in the mirror for a long moment. She had gotten ice from the machine and held it to her eye. She had gone home, set her alarm for 4:30, and come back in the morning to open the diner. Rex sat with all of this. The coffee in front of him had gone cold. Outside, the sun was fully up now, burning over the rooftops of Main Street in the flat way that Arizona sun burned in late summer. No mercy, no angle, just direct and total. "You should have called me." The words came out without heat because he didn't have heat for this. He had something colder. To do what? Ruth looked at him steadily. Not accusatory, just honest the way she'd always been honest with him, even when honest was the harder choice. What were you going to do, Rex? What would the answer have been? Because I know what the answer would have been. And I can't. She stopped. You promised me. 16 years ago, you sat in that booth right there, and you looked at me and you said you were done, that it was over, that you were never going back to being that man. This is different. It's not different. The moment it starts, it's not different. Her voice was quiet and entirely certain. You go after these people the old way, and the old way comes back with you. And then where are we? Where do we end up? I lose the diner or I lose you. Those have always been the only two options on the table, Rex. They're still the only two options. Rex looked at his mother, 85 years old. Eyes swollen shut, ribs, cracked hands wrapped around a coffee cup to keep them steady. The woman who had made him everything he was, who had held the line of his conscience when he had no conscience of his own, who had never once, not in 30 years of the life, not in 16 years after, treated him as anything less than the man she'd decided he could be. He thought about what she'd said. He thought about the notebook on the counter between them. He thought about the man in the black jacket, walking out the back door into the night like it was nothing, like she was nothing. Tell me one more thing, he said. The card the representative left. You still have it. Ruth reached into her apron pocket and laid it on the counter. Rex looked at it. Irongate Capital LLC. Carter Wynn, Chief Executive Officer. Phoenix, AZ. He memorized the name. Then he stood up, leaning across the counter, and kissed his mother's undamaged cheek with a gentleness that surprised even him. Lock the front door after the morning rush, he said. Call Beverly back and tell her to bring someone she trusts to help today. Don't be alone in the building. Rex and Ma. He picked up the notebook. I'm borrowing this. He walked toward the door. There's one more thing, Ruth said behind him. He stopped, turned back. She reached under the counter again, this time bringing up something smaller. A USB drive, the cheap kind, black plastic with a white sticker on the side. She set it on the counter between them. Beverly's nephew set it up, she said. 8 months ago, after that blue sedan idled across the street for the second time in the same week, I decided that noticing wasn't enough. She looked at the drive. There's a camera above the back door, small angle down at the steps. Records automatically every night to this. She paused. Last night's footage is on there. Rex stared at the drive. You had a camera, he said. I'm 85 years old, Ruth said. I'm not helpless. He put the drive in his jacket pocket alongside the notebook. He looked at his mother for a moment, at the camera statement, at everything it meant about the woman standing in front of him, and felt something he couldn't quite name settle into place in his chest. Lock up, he said. He went out into the Arizona morning. The air hit him with the full weight of an Arizona August, and Rex stood on the sidewalk outside Ruth's diner and let the day settle into his bones. Around him, Dusty Creek was fully awake now. Trucks pulling into the hardware store, the diner, supply place's delivery van double parked out front. The ordinary machinery of a small town's ordinary morning, grinding forward as though nothing had changed. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in 3 years. It rang 4 times. "Do you know what time it is?" The voice on the other end was gravel and cigarettes and 66 years of hard living carried easy. "This better be good, Rex." Hank. Rex had walked to his bike. He stood beside it without getting on one hand on the seat. "It's Rex. I need information. A company called Irongate Capital LLC out of Phoenix. CEO named Carter Wynn. I need everything available." A pause. The sound of something, a chair maybe, or a body rolling out of bed. "How personal is this?" Hank Decker asked. "They put their hands on my mother." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. "Jesus," Hank said. "Ruth. Yeah. She all right? She's Ruth." Which was both an answer and not an answer, and Hank had known him long enough to understand exactly what it meant. "Give me until noon." The sleep was entirely gone from Hank's voice now. "I'll make calls." "Thanks, Hank." "Rex." Hank's voice shifted. "You want me to bring anyone down, the boys would come. Half of them are retired fat and bored. They'd love an excuse." "Not yet. Information first." "And after that?" Rex looked at the diner. Through the window he could see his mother at the counter, moving slow and careful, favoring the right side. Making coffee for a diner that would open in 20 minutes regardless of what had happened the night before. "After that, we'll see," he said. He ended the call. He walked the 2 blocks to the sheriff's office with his hands in his pockets and the morning sun already working on his shoulders. Sheriff Clint Yarborough's truck was parked out front. New model F2508 late model, the kind of truck that cost $45,000. Rex looked at it as he walked past. Interesting for a man whose salary was public record and whose pension he'd complained about being insufficient on more than one Friday night over bourbon. The office was unlocked. The front desk was empty. Yarborough's door stood half open. Rex walked to it and knocked once. "Come on in." Yarborough was behind his desk with coffee and reading glasses and paperwork that was probably someone else's problem. 59 years old, gray hair cut short, the lean build of a man who still ran every morning because he'd started doing it in the army and never found a good reason to stop. He'd been sheriff of Dusty Creek for 14 years. Rex had known him for 10 of those, and for 8 of them, they'd been something that qualified as friendship bourbon. On Friday nights, the comfortable silence of men who'd both seen enough of the world to appreciate not having to explain themselves. Yarborough looked up and smiled. "Rex, you're early even for you." He reached for the coffee pot. "Sit down. My mother." The coffee pot stopped moving. Yarborough turned back slowly. Something in his face had already changed before Rex said another word. Not surprise. The absence of surprise. The face of a man who had been waiting for a specific conversation and just heard the first word of it. "Ruth is she. She's got a black eye, a split lip, and cracked ribs. From someone who came through her back door last night at closing time. Someone who told her she had 24 hours to reconsider selling her property to Irongate Capital LLC." Rex closed the door behind him. He did not sit down. "You called it kids, the window, the tires. 2 separate incidents, 2 separate reports. Both times you looked at it, you wrote something down and you told her it was probably kids." "Rex, I pause." "Clint." Rex moved to the desk. He didn't put his hands on it. He just stood in front of it, and his stillness was the kind that filled a room. "We have had 10 years of Friday nights. I've drunk your bourbon and listened to you talk about your daughter's college fund and your bad knee and the pension that's never going to be enough. So I am asking you one time, straight man to man, the way we've always talked." He paused. "What do you know about Irongate Capital?" The silence in the office had weight. Yarborough looked at his desk. He looked at the window. He looked at the coffee pot. He looked anywhere that was not Rex Malone's face. Then his shoulders went down in the way that shoulders went when the thing they were holding had finally become too heavy, and he looked at Rex. "It started 3 years ago," Yarborough said. His voice was the voice of a man confessing, which was different from the voice of a man explaining. There was no defense in it, just the flat sound of someone laying out the shape of a mistake they'd made and kept making until it was too late to call it a mistake anymore. A lawyer from Phoenix had called him, representing investors interested in Dusty Creek development. They wanted to know about the town's regulatory environment, the appetite for development, the likelihood of community support. He'd told them what he knew, which wasn't much, and they'd thanked him. Then they'd sent a gift basket. Yarborough had laughed and put it in the break room. Then tickets to a Cardinals game. He'd gone with his daughter. Then a weekend in Sedona. He'd taken his wife, who had needed a break and deserved one, and he hadn't been able to afford to give her one in years. Then they'd asked for something small, just to be notified if any property owners in the target corridor made formal complaints about harassment or vandalism. Just a heads up. Nothing that compromised investigations, nothing that interfered with his duties. Just information. He'd told himself that was nothing, that information was nothing, that a phone call was not corruption, and that the Sedona weekend was gratitude, not payment. He'd been wrong. And by the time he understood he'd been wrong, the amount he'd accepted and the number of calls he'd made had crossed the line from mistake to something that had a specific legal name. So he'd kept going. Because stopping looked worse than continuing, and because he'd told himself over and over that Irongate Capital was a legitimate development firm, that this was just business, that no one was getting hurt. He moved his hands across the desk and pulled out a folder, slid it toward Rex. Rex opened it. Inside, property records, purchase agreements, 9 separate transactions, 9 downtown Dusty Creek properties, all transferred to Irongate Capital, LLC, within the last 2 years, each at significantly below assessed market value, each with a handwritten note in the margin, Yarborough's notes marking the owner's name and the date of the final sale. 9 properties. And at the bottom of the list, in an entry with no sale date, no completion note, just a name and an address, Ruth's Diner, 401 Main Street. "They need all 9, Yarborough said quietly. "The whole block. The casino's footprint requires continuous property. Without Ruth's corner lot, the building permit doesn't clear the setback requirement. Without the permit, the investors walk." Rex closed the folder. He set it on the edge of the desk where it rested between them, like an accusation, which was exactly what it was. "Who did they send?" Rex said. "The man who went through her back door." Yarborough's jaw worked. "His name is Troy Slade. Used to run enforcement for the Mongols MC California chapter. He's done time for aggravated assault, came out 5 years ago. Irongate's been using him as their problem solver." "Where is he?" "Rex, where is he, Clint?" Yarborough picked up a pen, wrote an address on the back of a business card from the holder on his desk, held it out. Rex took it, didn't look at it yet, kept his eyes on Yarborough. He watched the man across the desk, watched the way Yarborough's hands stayed flat on the desk surface after he'd handed over the card. The way his eyes had gone to the desk phone twice in the last 3 minutes. Not dramatic gestures, small ones, the kind a man made when part of his attention was somewhere else, entirely calculating something, preparing something, waiting for the right moment to do something that needed doing. Rex had read rooms for 30 years. He read this one now and filed what he read. "There's something else," Rex said. Not a question. Yarborough looked at him. Something moved through the sheriff's expression. Guilt, yes, but underneath it something more complicated. Something that looked like a man deciding how much of a truth to tell. "They knew who you were before they went after Ruth's Diner," Yarborough said. His voice had dropped. I don't mean they looked you up when you started asking questions this morning. I mean, Iron Gate Capital knew that Ruth Malone was your mother from the beginning. Carter Wynne researched you before they ever sent anyone to Dusty Creek. He paused. He knew your history. He knew what you'd been, and he decided that the risk of your reaction was manageable. Rex looked at him. He chose my mother's diner because she's my mother, Rex said. That's what I believe, yes. The morning light came through the sheriff's office window and lay flat across the floor between them. Outside, Dusty Creek went about its business unaware. Rex picked up the folder and the business card. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. You were my friend, he said. Yarborough said nothing. You let them hurt her, not because you wanted them to, but because you kept telling yourself it wasn't your problem until it was, and by then you'd made too many choices to say no to one more. Rex didn't turn around. Do your job, that's all. Just do your job. He walked out. The Dusty Creek morning was fully into its heat now, the sun working on the pavement, the air carrying the dry electric smell of a day that would get worse before it got better. Rex walked back to his bike and stood beside it for a moment with the folder under one arm and the card in his hand. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. The voice on the other end was male flat professional. Mr. Malone, we're aware that you visited Sheriff Yarborough's office this morning. We'd like to strongly suggest that you consider carefully before taking any further action in this matter. Ruth Malone is elderly. Elderly people sustain injuries. Her next injury would not look like what happened last night. It would look like something that happened to an old woman who lived alone. A pause. Consider carefully. The offer remains open. The call ended. Rex stood beside his Harley on the corner of Main Street, with the sun hammering down and the oilcloth package in the back of his saddlebag, and his mother's notebook in his pocket, and the name Carter Wynne sitting in his chest like a coal lit from underneath. They had researched him. They had assessed him. They had decided he was manageable. And then, apparently, they had not finished the research. He put the phone in his pocket, started the Fat Boy's engine, and let the sound roll down Main Street the way it always did, low and unhurried, and without apology. He had 6 hours until Hank called back. He had an address on a business card, and he had 16 years of being a different man to weigh against everything he was feeling right now. He knew which way that scale was going to tip. He had known since the moment the coffee cup hit the checkerboard floor. The trailer park sat at the edge of Dusty Creek, the way unpleasant truth sat at the edge of consciousness, always there, mostly ignored, impossible to fully forget. 34 mobile homes, arranged in rows that had never quite straightened out, most of them older than Rex, held together by rust and stubbornness and the desert magic that kept things standing long past the point when standing made any rational sense. The access road was gravel that had been gravel for so long it had forgotten it was ever anything else. A hand-painted sign at the entrance said, Saguaro Flats Private Community, in letters that had faded to suggestions. Rex had been here before, not in years. But once you'd learned a terrain, the knowledge stayed in the body. The way certain other knowledge stayed. Muscle memory, instinctive geometry, the automatic calculation of angles and exits that never fully switched off, no matter how many years of peace you layered on top of it. He remembered the layout without trying. The way the rows dead-ended at the back fence, the single entrance and exit, the placement of the manager's unit at the front where the sight lines were best. He killed the Fat Boy's engine 4 spaces down from number 14. 11 in the morning now. The heat was absolute, the sky a white blue that offered nothing, the kind of Arizona August day that made the air feel like something you had to push through rather than breathe. A few residents were out, an older woman with a sun hat watering plants that had given up the effort of being alive some weeks ago but hadn't been informed of this. A shirtless man doing something theoretical to a truck engine. They both looked at Rex when he pulled in, then looked away in the practiced manner of people who had learned that curiosity was occasionally expensive. Space 14 was a single wide from the mid-80s. Once white, now the color of old teeth. A black pickup truck sat out front, late model crew cab. The kind of truck that cost $45,000 and had no business being in this parking space. The contrast was not subtle. Rex dismounted, stretched until his back made a sound like a branch under pressure. Noted the angle of the windows, the position of the door, the way the curtain over the kitchen window had moved once since he'd pulled in, a specific deliberate movement, not the random motion of air through a gap. Someone had been watching the road. He walked across the gravel. His boots made the only sound worth making. At the door, he knocked, not hard, the knock of a man who had somewhere else he could be and was choosing here, which was different from the knock of a man who needed to be somewhere. Nothing. He knocked again, the same way. The door opened. The man who filled the frame was younger than Rex by 15 years, and built in the manner of someone who had spent significant portions of those years doing things that required a specific physical vocabulary. 6'2", 6'3", 240, not the soft weight of a man who ate too much, but the dense, load-bearing weight of someone who had trained for utility. His head was shaved close. A scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye to the line of his jaw, the kind of scar that came from a blade handled by someone who knew what they were doing. His eyes went to Rex's face, down to his boots, back up, reading, filing, professional. "Help you," he said. The voice was flat and dry as the ground outside. "Looking for Troy Slade," Rex said.